Morning, folks. My name is Brian Eardley. I sit within the biodiversity team within Scottish Government, and as I'll come on to, my main role is 30 by 30 delivery, which is the protected areas and expanding the area of protected areas in Scotland. But the 30 by 30 network is very much part of Nature Network. So what I'm going to do quickly this morning is just skip through what a nature network is so that we're all on the same page in that regards, and then just lay out what the policy context is, both in terms of NPF4, the other policy areas within Scottish Government that nature networks cut across, and then the work that's in progress to develop nature networks and how we're going to implement them going forward. So just on nature networks themselves, this is just a very simple diagram which is supposed to show what a nature network is. The problem we have in many areas of Scotland at the moment is that our biodiversity rich areas are very much islands, so there's little room within out with the sort of biodiversity rich area for species to move, and we know from what we're seeing through climate change that our winters are getting warmer and wetter, our summers are getting drier, and we're getting more extremes as well, so flash flooding, etc., which is all not only putting a stress on biodiversity, but also on people as well. And part of the reaction that nature is having to these changes is that we are seeing species ranges change. So we used to have a lot of geese that overwintered in central Scotland. Those are now what they call short stopping in Orkney, so are no longer coming near mainland Scotland. So we're seeing those changes, but we're also seeing within habitats that species are perhaps getting a competitive advantage over others. So the composition within habitats is changing as well. So ultimately, what we're aiming to do with nature networks is give nature a bit more space to actually move around under its own sort of fruition, if you like, and adapt to changing circumstances. And this can be facilitated in a number of ways. There are sort of linear corridors that can be created. Those could be hedgerows, those could be riparian planting along burns and riversides. But they could also be stepping stones, so smaller pockets of suitable habitat for species to move into. And this is throughout their sort of daily and also seasonal needs in terms of foraging, sort of resting places, but also the migration movement that they may need to make during the seasons as well. So that's nature networks in a nutshell. So moving on to NPF4, just building on what Cara was saying in terms of the nature networks being embedded throughout through the document, but principally within policy 3, both in terms of local development, but also the bigger developments as well. But it's not just restricted to policy 3. Elsewhere within NPF4, there are nature networks are mentioned within the natural places chapter, green belts, but also in some of the national developments, CSGN being the most obvious one, but also within the spatial priorities set out in NPF4 for the north and central regions. So just to give you a little bit of policy context for nature networks, as I said, this is very much a nesting of strategy that's going on here. We've got the environment strategy that's been out for a number of years now, which sets the overall context for Scotland's environment and how we want to sort of progress in light of the climate and nature emergencies. Nested within that is the Scottish Biodiversity Strategy and the delivery plan, which will be going out to consultation later in the summer this year, and that will set out a number of key actions that need to be taken if we're to achieve this transformation in the way that we interact with nature and how we manage for nature going forwards. And a key plank of the delivery plan and the strategy itself are the nature networks and how we look to strengthen the networks that are in place at the moment, build on them where we can, enhance them through various means, NPF4 and positive effects for biodiversity being one, but there are others through perhaps agri-environment or forestry as well. And then, as I said earlier, nested within the nature networks is the 30 by 30, which is a subset of the wider networks, if you like, in terms of the areas that have special protection, whether that's through a protected area in its own right, a triple SI or a European site, or through a new mechanism which we're working up at the moment, which is another effective conservation measure, which is some sort of perhaps contractual or other sort of legal arrangement whereby long-term management for nature is secured. So this slide is just really to give an overview of the sort of policy areas that are feeding into the nature networks development. On the right hand side there, the amber arrows show the different areas across marine, forestry, local land use partnerships, NPF4, net zero, and adaptation to climate change also plays a big part in there. On the left hand side, on the blue arrows, you've got those who are the partners who are contributing to building nature networks. So big role for local authorities, as you would expect, but also public landowners, environmental NGOs, private landowners as well. And then in the centre there are some of the main sort of policy streams that are coming through in terms of delivery. So you've got marine protected areas, 30 by 30, which I've also mentioned. But we've also got the commitment to a new national park in Scotland within this Parliament, and also as part of that work, there's work ongoing looking at the powers and functions of national parks and whether they need to be slightly sort of realigned to better reflect the climate and nature crises. And then you've got how local authority designations might be used, and again, either within the broader nature networks, but also perhaps as part of the 30 by 30 as well, if longer term management can be secured. So what we've been doing in partnership with Nature Scot over the past 6 months or so is bringing together a range of stakeholders in a co-design process to essentially set the principles that we're going to take forward in a delivery framework for nature networks. And the phrase at the top there in the bold is that the vision that this co-design process has agreed as the sort of the umbrella through which all the work will be taken forward. So the delivery framework will be part of a consultation on the Scottish Biodiversity Strategy Delivery Plan, which will be, as I said, out later in the summer. So there'll be an opportunity for those who haven't been involved in the co-design process, which I know a number of people on this call have been, but if you haven't been involved, there'll be an opportunity to have a look at that delivery framework for both nature networks and 30 by 30, and to put any comments back so that we can strengthen the principles for taking this work forward. But essentially, the themes that have come out of the discussions so far have been, as Simon was saying earlier, we're looking to connect existing habitats where we can, and that's right from urban through peri-urban into the rural environment as well, but also recognizing that we need to sort of connect perhaps better in some instance from the coast as we move inland, and the interaction between different waterways as well. We're also looking at nature networks in different sort of scales, if you like, so very much seeing them as being built up from the local scale, but recognizing that there will be a need for collaboration between local authorities, perhaps in terms of building regional networks, but also the national picture as well. And finally, it's going to be critical that we learn from the experience of other projects which are ongoing at the moment, which are currently building enhancing networks as well. So just to give you a little bit of a flavour of the timeline, so we've got the biodiversity strategy which is in place, and that you can see from the yellow box, we've had the co-design workshops, which will set the national framework and will inform the guidance that between Scottish Government and Nature Scot will be taking forward in terms of nature networks. That will be coming out to consultation in the summer. In terms of 30 by 30, there will also be an element that will be going forward into the Natural Environment Bill, and the consultation for the 30 by 30 aspects of the bill is likely to come in the autumn of this year. The Natural Environment Bill itself will be laid before Parliament in 2024. So the darker green box on this slide here is just really showing you the principles that have been agreed in the co-design process. So it is about restoring and enhancing habitats. It's about connectivity. It's about leadership and participation, but it's also very much about landscape scale, knowledge exchange, communication and education as well. And parts of that sort of communication and education is going to be the development of what we're calling a toolbox, which is going to evolve over time as people get experience of either dealing with sort of building nature networks through NPF4 or through other means. We'll be looking to capture case studies. We're also looking at perhaps developing opportunity mapping, which should enable you to local authorities or anybody wishing to establish a network to identify existing biodiversity hotspots and then how best they could be linked into a network going forward. And then just finally, from me, just a few comments on the initiatives that are underway in terms of supporting delivery. So we have the local development planning guidance, which came out last month, which gives pointers in terms of how local plans might look to embed nature networks in sort of putting them together and delivery going forward. As Simon mentioned in his talk, where we have active LBAPs and LBAP partnerships working, they are likely to be key to delivery going forward. I've mentioned the toolkit already. There is the acknowledgement that this costs money, so the Nature Restoration Fund will continue to provide funding for developing nature networks going forward. But beyond that, we're aware that it's unlikely that public sector finance in itself is going to be sufficient. So work is underway within Scottish Government to develop the investment plan for the Scottish Biodiversity Strategy. So that will try to make sure that we've got sufficient funds or identified where the funds would be coming from to deliver nature networks 30 by 30 and the other commitments within the strategy. And then the final element here is skills development and training, of which this day is very much part. I think that's me. Thank you, Trevor.